Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, September 4th, 2008. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. Well, this week, home brewer John Chubick of Bloomington, Illinois, joins us to talk about building gadgets to use in the brew house. John uses found objects in his workshop to assemble homemade gear to improve his brewing process. We'll talk about three of those today. If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And you can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing. All one word. Before we get into the mailbag and the interview, we have an update from Fred Johnson, who you heard a few episodes ago, describing his experiments to compare shaking versus pumping as aeration techniques. Fred has found an issue with his oxygen meter in measuring oxygen at the low end of the scale. Fred says that this doesn't change the overall conclusion of his experiment, that shaking is quicker and more effective than using an aquarium pump in dissolving oxygen into the beer, but he says it does have relevance in one measurement, one aspect of the experiment, and I'll let Fred explain.
James, I need to report to you that I have recently discovered that some of the results I reported in our recent interview, and which you published in my manuscript regarding aeration methods, were in error. You will recall that I said much about the surprising finding that the deoxygenated water contained a relatively high amount of oxygen in it immediately after delivery to the boil kettle. That was after it had been boiled, gone through the counterflow chiller, and delivered into the carboy or the bucket. I thought about this some more, and I felt more uncomfortable that I was not able to demonstrate a lower oxygen content of the boiled water. So I decided to try to prove to myself that my initial observations were real. To get to the point, I have recently discovered that my meter was falsely giving me high values at the low end of the dissolved oxygen content of water. This past weekend, I attempted to measure the oxygen content of boiled water collected in a 1-quart mason jar submerged in the boiling water while it was still in the kettle. I used heat-proof, heat-shielding gloves to do this, and after collecting the sample of water directly from the kettle by submerging the jar in the boiling water, and then I sealed the jar such that there was no headspace in the container. I felt like this was the best I could do to get a minimum amount of oxygen in the water. I sampled the water at several time points, just before the boil, about 90 degrees centigrade, at the beginning of the boil, and at a few time points thereafter during the boil. The 1-quart samples sealed in the jars were allowed to cool to nearly room temperature, and the dissolved oxygen contents were measured immediately after opening each cooled container. The minimum value of dissolved oxygen was reached shortly after boiling, but the value was still 2.5 milligrams per liter. The value should be close to zero. This relatively high value surprised me again, so I proceeded to further determine if I could get a lower value some other way. I calibrated the meter again with air-saturated water at room temperature to a value of 8.46 milligrams per liter, which is normal, of course, for saturated water, water saturated with air at room temperature at my altitude. And then I added sodium metabisulfite to the water in several small additions, stirring it in each time until I reached a minimum value. You will recall that metabisulfite will combine with molecular oxygen to essentially completely remove all the dissolved oxygen in the water. I was, again, only able to get the dissolved oxygen value down to a minimum of 3.2 milligrams per liter. So at this point I was convinced that my dissolved oxygen meter or the probe were defective, and they're giving me erroneously high values at the low end of the scale. I'm very sorry for the confusion my error may have caused, but I hasten to say that I don't think this will change the major conclusions of the experiments that I reported earlier. I believe the relative rates of oxygen dissolution using the methods that I reported are not affected by the error, but I'm somewhat embarrassed that my values were in error and that I made a pretty strong point based on those erroneous values. I promise to repeat the experiments if and when I fix the problem with my meter or my probe, and I promise to report the results to you as soon as I can. Others have expressed other ways of aerating water that I should test, and I'm very happy to do that, and I'll try my best to get those experiments done, again, as soon as I can get the meter fixed.
So I appreciate Fred's letting us know about the discrepancy. Once again, the trouble was in measuring the lowest end of the oxygen saturation scale, so Fred doesn't believe it has an impact on the overall conclusions of the experiment, that shaking was better than an aquarium pump. But I'm looking forward to hearing more results from Fred as he continues his work. Todd from Tiffin, Ohio writes in after hearing our experiment last week, brewing with the French press coffee maker, the French press pale ale. Todd says, as I listened to the French press hopping podcast, I was in the midst of making a hop tea with 1 gram of glacier pellets and about 15 ounces of water in a French press. Just when you were describing the vegetal flavors, I tasted my own hop tea and was overwhelmed with a tannic broccoli bomb. Try as I might, I was unable to discern a single pleasant hop aroma. I hope your pale ale doesn't finish up with anything like these flavors. Well, Todd, I tasted the French press pale ale last night from the fermenter, and the good news is that it doesn't have any of the vegetal broccoli notes that we first detected when we were brewing out on the patio, so that's good news. The not-so-good news is that it doesn't have the hoppiness that I was hoping for. And I'm thinking that it may be due to my homegrown Cascades. Maybe they weren't as powerful even as they were last year. So I'm going to try boosting the bitterness, the flavor, and the aroma with a commercial hop addition in the secondary, kind of like Chris Colby describes in the Brew Your Own article, and I'll let you know how that comes out. I still have hope. Tim in Eureka, Missouri writes, just finished my second brew day ever. A double batcher with an Irish red ale and the pumpkin porter from the Extreme Brewing book. That's Sam Calagioni's book. Both carboys bubbled nicely 2 days later, or both carboys are bubbling nicely 2 days later. Tim says, question for you, the porter recipe calls for transferring into a bucket after 7 days, cleaning out the carboy, and then transferring back in for a secondary. This is to remove most of the pumpkin particulate that has precipitated. Precipitated pumpkin particulate. How can I do this without significant risk of oxidation? Use a CO2 fill? Well, Tim, you could use a CO2 fill. You could flood the bucket and then the carboy with CO2 to help cut down on oxidation. But what I'd do is just rack from your primary into a bucket or another carboy for secondary and just leave the beer there. As far as I can see, there's no need to rack back into the primary after cleaning it. I read the recipe in Extreme Brewing, and I don't know. I'm not sure why Sam tells you to rack it twice, to rack it away from the primary, clean the primary, and then rack it back in. It seems to me that the more you move a beer, the more risks you have, not only of oxidation, but of contamination as well. So if it were me, I'd just move it into a secondary and just leave it there. That's just my 2 cents. Well, now let's move into our interview for this week. I met John Chubick online when he sent me a link to a YouTube video he made showing off his homemade fermentation temperature controller. And we got to talking online about gadgets and such, and I thought, well, there's a show right there. So I got in touch with John to find out more. Well, John Chubick, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on your show.
Well, I appreciate your coming on. We've corresponded both through email and through Twitter, and that's a fun little thing. I was kind of skeptical at first about the whole Twitter thing. My friend Kelly introduced me to it, but I've actually had fun doing it.
It kind of grows on you. Yeah, it kind of grows on you. It really does. I find that I'm using it more than I thought I would as well.
And it's interesting. There's kind of a little community that's built up, at least around the people that that I'm following and that follow me and sometimes chime in. And I tend to only select people to follow that talk mostly about beer. If you follow me and I'm not following you, don't be offended. I tend to follow people who are single-minded about about the topic of beer.
Sure, yeah, me too. And sometimes I wonder how people even find me and why they even would want to follow me, to be honest with you.
Well, it's kind of like the spider web, of the World Wide Web. You get connections here, there, and everywhere.
Yeah, it is fun.
But that's, as usual, I've started off on a tangent right away. That's not the reason I asked you on the show. You sent me a link to a video, which we'll talk about a little later, and we got to talking about homebrew gadgets. And you are a person who likes to tinker. What's your background? What do you do, and what leads you into wanting to be kind of the mad scientist of homebrewing equipment?
Well, I do like to tinker. I think I always have. Even when I was very young, I just liked to take things apart and see how they were made and that kind of thing. Later on in life, my father actually got me interested in amateur radio. So I became a ham radio operator about 13 years ago. And that led me into further study of electronics. And just on my own, I have no formal training, and anybody who sees some of the stuff I've made, that becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly. But so the amateur radio hobby definitely has a lot of ties into electronics. And what I try to do is tie. I have a number of other hobbies as well, brewing beer being one of them. But I try to, where I can, tie my hobbies together so that they're not sort of begging for my attention individually. I just sort of try to tie them together. And amateur radio, the electronics part of it sort of lends itself to doing some things with brewing. Brewing and actually talking on the radio don't necessarily lend themselves to one another, but the electronics part of it does.
Yeah, if you do a search for homebrew on Google, a lot of times you get links that take you back to ham radio.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't found that.
Yeah, like homebrew equipment, the homebrew guides to do electronic things. So, there you go, the World Wide Web. That's another random connection. and
it's interesting, yeah.
Home brewing itself, it seems to lend to gadget building. I mean, I've certainly built gadgets myself, and anybody who's built a mash tun, of their own, can be found wandering the connection aisle of the copper connection aisle of Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever. In fact, I talked to one homebrew store owner. He used to sell a copper manifold system in a mash tun, like a cooler, picnic cooler. Mm-hmm. But he found that more people would come in and just measure it and get
so they can make it themselves.
Exactly. They just come in with a measuring tape, measure the manifold, and then go home and make their own. So he found that it wasn't very profitable for him to do that. So, if you're hands-on enough to get into the hobby, you're probably hands-on enough to get into building your own gadgets out of necessity. And if you're like me, you're fairly cheap too. So
yeah, well, I think that's part of my motivation as well. I think I tend to be a little bit on the cheap side as well when it comes to that. And, quite frankly, I mean, there are some excellent homebrew stores online, but it's hard to find, actual homebrew equipment locally. Until recently, we really didn't have anybody here in town who sold any kind of homebrew equipment. So you could find resources on the internet for how to make this stuff. But like you said, you're shopping at Lowe's or Menards or somewhere to find the parts to actually make it yourself.
Now we're going to talk about 3 projects that you've done where you have used material on hand. So, do you have like a pile of stuff that you, is there a pile in your basement? Is there a section of your basement where, there are just bits and pieces of electronic gear and such that you don't want to throw away because you know that you'll use it later on? Well,
I do have, and I gotta give my wife credit. I'm very fortunate. My wife is actually supportive of all my hobbies, to be honest. And so yeah, she puts up with me like saving old DVD players that no longer work, because I might want a piece of the electronics that's inside that DVD player, or boxes for equipment that I might want to ship back to the manufacturer for repair or something like that. So she's supportive of all that, and I do have a section in my basement where I have a number of old used electronics that no longer work. Some of them still work, but most of them do not.
And we live in an age where electronics are disposable. I mean, if you buy a VCR nowadays, well, you don't buy a VCR nowadays, I guess, but you can't pay anybody to replace it or to repair it. You might as well just replace it. So. Yeah,
that's true. Right. It's a razor blade industry.
Yeah. Let's talk about your hop dryer. What was the inspiration? How did you wind up with the particular design for your hop dryer?
Well, I'd heard a number of others, and I think even you had mentioned on one of your earlier shows that you used a window screen to dry hops on. And then I had heard others mention using a fan to sort of pull air over the hops or through the hops to help them dry more quickly. So I thought I'd like to perhaps combine both ideas. And so I dry my hops on a window screen, but I created a shroud, which I then put like a small computer fan on the top of this cardboard shroud to pull the air through the hops and help them dry. And the shroud that I happened to use, I was just looking for a piece of cardboard that I could cut to fit the size of my window screen when in that corner of the basement where I keep this stuff, I found a Guitar Hero box that almost perfectly fit the window screen. So that's what I'm using.
So you've got a window screen, and then on top of that you lay your hops. And then on top of that, you've opened up your Guitar Hero box, and then in the top of it, you've mounted this computer fan essentially that draws the air up through the hops, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I can actually stack more than one screen on top of another, and I feel that with the air being drawn through, up from the bottom of, I have the air pulling out the top, so the air comes up through the bottom. And I can stack 2 or 3 window screens, and I don't have any problems with the hops drying within, 24, 36 hours.
Wow. Now, so you've got rock and roll hops. I love that.
Rock and roll hops.
Now,
I call it my Guitar Hero hop dryer. It's really the only relation to Guitar Hero is the box that I used for the fan shroud.
Well, it looks cool. I've seen a picture of it. It definitely looks hip. Yeah. Now, in my house, and I've discussed this on numerous occasions, just setting the hops out in one layer in that one bedroom works for me. And then if you go on to YouTube, you can do a search for Alton Brown's herb drying method where he uses a box fan and then ties these filters for air conditioner, central air conditioner units onto that with a bungee cord, and then in between the layers of that filter, he puts herbs essentially. And I've gotten email from people saying that works as well. So I think that Alton Brown would fit well into this conversation. He seems to me to be a bit of a tinkerer as well. Yeah, I think he would. And I think he actually did a show on brewing beer at one time, didn't he? Yeah, he did. I have a little bitty, well, not a little bitty list, a little list of things I would do differently, but. Yeah. I didn't say he did it well. I just said he did a show on it one time. Well, you gotta give it to him for doing a show on it because I've had people who have emailed me saying that I saw about brewing beer and Alton Brown's show, and then I found you on the internet, and so he did inspire people to go to the homebrew store and get started. Sure. So we've got to give him credit for that. We can't be too picky, too hard on Alton for that. No, but I don't think many of us would get away with using ice to cool our wort like he did. No, there's a bunch of people who do that. So okay. I'll send you the email. They have cleaner ice than I do. Let's put it that way. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I've had people say, I make ice out of spring water and put that in there. Well, okay, I can see that. But one thing that Alton said was, once you put your yeast in, don't shake it. Don't get any air in there. And I was like, huh? Oh, no. So anyway, enough picking on Alton Brown. So a lot of people use old computer fans to make magnetic stir plates, but you found another source for that. Yeah, I did. Actually, my method actually uses a computer fan, and you can find those fans actually inside of computer power supplies. So I just happened to have, 2 or 3 old power supplies that had burned out. I harvested the fan out of one of them. I had a hard drive that was no longer functioning, so I found a strong magnet inside of that hard drive, mounted that magnet on a fan. And then I was looking for a case to use, and I had read, actually, BYO came out, I think, the next issue of BYO, just after I was thinking about this, came out with doing it in a cigar box, I believe. So I was looking around for something, maybe the size of a cigar box, and what I found was a DVD player that had recently bit the dust and I was hanging on to that was the right size. So I gutted the inside, except what I found when I got inside was a nice little compact 12-volt power supply, which was perfect for powering the fan. So I gutted everything except the power supply, hooked up the fan with the magnet mounted on the fan, and had a magnetic stir plate. Now, can you control the speed of the stir? Yeah, so one of the things I did was add a variable speed switch for the fan. I did that, right. So you would get that component, say, at Radio Shack or something like that? Right. There's a variable LM317, I think, is the part. It's a variable voltage, and you can find the circuit online for, hooking up a resistor, a variable resistor to that, and varies the voltage, and that varies the speed of the fan then. So are there any hazards to if can anybody just open any piece of home entertainment equipment and expect to find a suitable power supply for something like this, or do you have to pay attention to the amperages or the wattages, or you have to be especially careful if you open up a television, especially the old tube type televisions. They really have some dangerous voltages inside that even if they've been unplugged for a long time, can actually retain some of those thousands of volts that are potentially lethal. So
I don't even open up old television sets. I just leave them for somebody else. But things like DVD players, you have to be a little bit careful where the AC comes into the unit. But beyond that, they usually go into a transformer, and that transforms the voltage down to 5 or 12 volts. And you don't have to be as careful with those kinds of things.
A friend of mine found out in college that it's not good to set things like auto-reverse tape decks on fire. That's kind of it's not a long story, but his auto-reverse tape deck stopped working on him, and he was sick of it, so we took it out back and decided to set it on fire for some reason because we were in college. And turns out capacitors and things like that, they tend to blow up when you set them alight. So
yeah,
don't do
I've heard that. I don't have any personal experience, but I have heard that.
It's quite exciting. And it left a bit of a mark on our driveway. So don't do that. So the third project I want to talk about is it sprouted out of sort of an extension of our low-tech lagering system that we talk about on our low-tech lagering and decoction mashing DVD. And I've been pretty tight-lipped about what the low-tech lagering system is, and I've actually been lurking on some message boards out there where people have been asking other brewers, what is this low-tech lagering system? Is it like this other system? And the other guys who have actually bought the DVD are saying, they're so it's kind of interesting to see that they're tight-lipped as well. So
just buy the DVD,
right? So I appreciate everybody protecting our investment in the in the technology, but I think that it's been out there for a year, so I think we can kind of give a little peek into what the low-tech lagering system is. And the low-tech lagering system essentially is it uses two coolers. And in one cooler, you put your fermenter, and around that you put water, and you put copper tubing, and then you use a second cooler to put cold water, and then you use a pump to go from the cold water around the fermenter and back into the cold water reservoir. And that is regulated by a temperature control unit. So is that a pretty good description of the theory?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
So you've tried the low-tech lagering system? Has it worked for you?
I have. When I saw that your new DVD come out, well, first of all, it also covers decoction mashing.
That's right.
So I was interested in that as well. So I did buy the DVD when it first came out. And I had not been able to brew lagers because I do have a kegerator, but I didn't want, it's full of beer, right? So I didn't want to use up any space. It actually would take up the space of 2 corny kegs just to put a fermenter in. So I didn't want to take up the space to brew a lager, and when I saw your video, I thought, well, that sounds interesting. I want to check that out, and I wanted to check out the decoction mashing as well. So I ordered the video, and coincidentally, I had been thinking about how I might, in the wintertime, brew a lager and keep it in my garage where it's going to be cold, so I'm going to have to actually warm the fermenter up to bring it up to lager temperature. So I had already been thinking about how to do some temperature control device, and I knew there were commercial devices out there. I didn't know if they worked for heating as well as cooling. And to be honest, I had been playing around with Microchip's PIC microprocessor, and I was just looking for a project, there again, where I could combine 2 hobbies, and was looking for an excuse to, make a project, whether it was commercially available or not.
Yeah, one of the, as I said, I'm fairly cheap. And other than, in addition to not wanting to make room for another refrigeration unit in the house, just for lagering purposes, I wanted to see if I could make a lagering system out of kind of stuff that I already had on hand. And the two coolers are actually unmodified, which is handy because then you could use them as coolers, or you could use them as mash tuns or whatever after you got through lagering. But to me, the kind of challenge, and Andy Sparks gets credit also for some of the design of the low-tech lagering system, but to me some of the challenge was, I know, as you said, I know there's commercially available stuff out there, but that's kind of cheating,
Yeah, what fun is that?
So you made this. You made your own temperature control unit.
I did. There's Microchip makes a whole range of microprocessors, and I just chose I'd already done some projects of interfacing an LCD display with a microprocessor, and various other small projects which really had no practical application. So I was looking for a project where I could, use an LCD display to actually display temperature. I could set the target temperature up or down and then use it as a thermostat device where if the temperature dropped below the target that I had set, or above, depending on whether you're heating or cooling, that it would then trip a relay which would have plugged into that either a pump for the low-tech lagering method, or maybe a brew belt for if you want to bring things up in temperature, then maybe a brew belt for warming. So that's kind of the I guess that's the concept behind the commercially available ones. I don't know if any of them have an LCD display or not. One of the things that I've been toying with doing but just haven't done yet because I'm not sure it's all that practical would be, capture a log of the temperature and, what it is, hour by hour over the duration of the lagering. But, as I got to thinking about that, really, if the temperature controller is working like it shouldn't vary by more than a couple of degrees over the whole duration anyway. So what kind of components do you have to purchase to put this thing together? Well, I had already been playing with the microprocessor, so you have to have a programming board of some sort that plugs into your computer. So you actually do the software coding on your PC, transfer that code to the microchip, and then the microchip itself interfaces with a temperature probe. It interfaces with a relay circuit to control the device that's plugged in. It interfaces with the LCD display, and mine interfaces with 3 buttons on the front of the unit. So I can use those buttons to sort of rotate through menus where I can decide, do I want to display in Fahrenheit or Celsius? Do I want to do cooling or heating? And do I want to set my temperature up or down? And then I have another menu where I can actually save the settings. So if I should lose power or whatever, the settings actually get saved in memory on the chip. And then when the power would come back on, it cycles through and reads what the temperature setting should be and takes off again from there.
Now, you've got a background in application design. Can someone with a limited knowledge of computer programming set up something like this? Is the code simple enough?
The programming itself isn't really that hard, but to be honest, there's a bit of a learning curve to I started out with you have a number of options in terms of what language you use to program the chips. I started out in assembler basically because the assembler assemblers. Working in assembly language was cheap because you could use microchips assembly language. And if you wanted to program in a higher level language like C or BASIC, then some of those compilers were you had to pay for those. I think there's some free ones out there now, but when I started out, those were not available. So there's a bit of a learning curve and a little bit of an investment in terms of the programming board that plugs into your computer that interfaces with the chip to download the code to the microprocessor. But no, I think anybody who wants to learn and wants to spend a little time with it can pick it up. And I actually have a friend here belongs to the local brew club. I know it's something he's working on too. So it can be done. Yeah.
So you actually have a video out on YouTube that demonstrates your piece of gear, right?
I do. Actually, I think there's 2 or 3 videos that I sort of did in stages as I progressed. And I think the third video, actually, and I may have to apologize here, it may give away too many clues as to what's on the low-tech lagering DVD.
Well, well, there's still, you still get to see Steve and me do stuff. And what else? What else do you want? No, we do. There is enough stuff. Even if we told you how to, what's behind the LTLS, there's still enough stuff on there to justify the investment. I would agree. I have done a decoction mash, and I really, until I got the DVD, I wasn't sure how to do that. I had heard, I think your podcast at one point you covered decoction mashing, and I had read things about it, but until I actually see you guys do it on the DVD, I was a little uncomfortable with doing it myself. So it did inspire me to do that. This is not a paid endorsement. This is not yet, at least.
The check is in the mail.
So what was your biggest challenge in designing and constructing the temperature controller?
It's probably the challenge that I still have outstanding. It's for whatever reason the LCD display tends not to work after a certain period of time, and I haven't spent a lot of time troubleshooting that yet, but I think it has to do with maybe some electromagnetic interference when the relay switches on and off. Now, the thing that it doesn't affect is, it still continues to function, but you can't look at it and see what, the display just isn't working any longer. So I haven't really spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. Otherwise, it was, interfacing with the temperature sensor, which is just a chip that looks like a transistor. It's a little chip with 3 legs on it. And prior to this project, I hadn't had any experience with that temperature sensor. So that was interesting, and I actually moved from one type of sensor to this particular one that I'm using because I for the life of me, I couldn't figure out how to get the other one to work.
Well, maybe somebody out there has experience with these components, and we can hook you guys up after they see what you're working with, and I'll post a link to the videos in the description of this episode. But
excellent.
You spent a lot of time on this, and I would assume, I would hope not as much money as just buying a controller. So what would you say to somebody out there who says, look, why don't you just buy something like that from the store? You can get those.
I would say buy it. To be honest, I would say buy it. If your time is worth anything, just buy it.
That wasn't the answer I expected, John. You're undermining the entire basis of our hobby here. It shouldn't be just buy it.
I would say if you enjoy electronics, if it's something you want to learn, there are a lot of good resources on the internet for figuring out how to program, whether it's microchip, microprocessors. There's Arduino is another microprocessor that's very popular right now. There's a lot of resources on the internet for that. If that's something that really interests you, in addition to being a brewer, then this particular project you can learn a lot from. I certainly did. So yeah, it depends. If your time is worth anything and you don't see this really as a hobby, then I would say just go out and buy it. Otherwise, if it's something you want to learn and get into, then it's a lot of fun.
Well, I guess it's just like brewing. If you think that spending 5.5, 6 hours out on the patio brewing up a batch of beer would be torture, home brewing is not going to be for you.
That's exactly
buy
right.
your beer, but if you enjoy the process of cooking and building gadgets and such as that in order to pursue a home brewing hobby, then that's the hobby for you.
That's exactly right.
So just buy it. If Charlie Papazian had that saying instead of relax, don't worry, have a homebrew, we wouldn't be here talking.
Yeah, you're right.
Oh, well, but I assume you do enjoy the home brewing process of actually making beer.
Oh, I love it. I've only been brewing a couple of years, and I was really surprised. My brother actually bought me a kit for Christmas, I guess almost 3 years ago now. And I thought, I sort of gave him the idea. He was looking for ideas, and I said, well, this is something I'm, kind of interested in. I like to try different beers, so I'd perhaps like to, try making it myself. And I was actually hooked, from my first not so good beer, and but since then my beers have gotten better. My family has begun to enjoy better beers, and whether they're commercial or mine, either one. I think it's interesting to watch that. And it's just a hobby that has so many facets to it. If you're really interested in the chemistry part of it, you can certainly get into that. pH plays a big role in it, and you talk about alpha acids and isomerization and all these things. Biology, the life cycle of yeast is it's crucial in beer. And fermentation temperature, and and it's also, there's a bit of art to it. So if you like to cook, as you said earlier, if you like to cook, I sort of liken it to cooking, where you have this whole palette of flavors that you can bring together in a beer, some way. Part of that you have control over, and part of it you don't really have so much control over because the yeast plays such a big part in that. Mm-hmm. So it's a fascinating hobby. I do enjoy it.
Well, there you go. I feel better about you now, John. I have to kid. That's just. Well, this has been a lot of fun, and
yeah,
I appreciate your spending time, and keep us updated on how the temperature controller's going, and post updates on YouTube.
Okay, I will.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, James.
Well, thanks again to John. Once again, I'll post links to John's YouTube videos in the description of this episode on basicbrewingradio.com. And he even made for the low-tech lagering system, he even made a cooler to put the primary in from a couple of trash cans and some foam insulation. So he even went further than we did. It was a fun conversation. It might be fun to do more gadget interviews. So if you have some cool brewing devices that you've designed, let me know. Maybe we can make a regular feature. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com, and please don't forget to tell us where you're from. You can check out our low-tech lagering and decoction mashing DVD on basicbrewingshop.com, where you can see Steve do a single-step decoction mash. And you can follow me through a lager fermentation in the middle of summer using the LTLS. But, there's more to just, what the LTLS is. We show you how to lager no matter how you keep your fermenter cool. So there you go. There are also our original DVDs in Basic Brewing, Introduction to Extract Home Brewing. We walk you through the extract brewing process, step by step, from boiling to bottling. And in Basic Brewing, Stepping into All Grain, we take you through the all grain process, from milling your grain to collecting your wort. We've got combo deals on the site, and you can also, importantly, see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs in homebrew shops on basicbrewing.com in the Where to Buy section. We encourage your support of them. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order from us online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. And I'll put it in a box myself and send it to you. Remember, we have shirts with different colors. We now have 6 colors to choose from. And thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link as well. We're getting a lot of support through that, and I appreciate that a lot. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Lincoln Lubrication 1444 14.4 volt power luber kit and 2 batteries. You had to know when you ordered the power luber that it was going to be mentioned on the show. And Olympus eVolt E520 digital SLR camera body with Olympus 16 to 60 millimeters Zuico digital EDF 2.8 to 4.0 SWD lens, plus Olympus 70 to 300 millimeters Zuico f4.0 to 5.6 ED zoom lens, plus 8 gigabyte compact flash memory card, plus BLM1 battery, plus case, plus the camera bonus accessory kit. Not only is that the longest description of any item that's been purchased on the Amazon link, I'm pretty sure that we've got a record of the most expensive single item that's ever been purchased through the link. So thank you very much. Thanks to everybody. But wow, hope you take some wonderful, wonderful pictures with your new camera. Thanks again, everybody. Remember, I can't tell who bought what. Unfortunately, in that case, I'd like to send a thank you note or something. So no worries, no worries there. If you're buying power lubers or whatever, just click on the... It's just fun to say power luber. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We appreciate your support there. We've also got an associate link to the Apple Store on our site, which needs to be dusted off. That's all until next week. I don't know. It must be the remains of Gustav that are dribbling outside there. It's distracting me this week. Until next week, thanks for listening. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dotson down in Austin. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.